I will start streaming more consistency and stuff like that. I've kind of learned I don't want to stream video games or like stream Let's Plays. More so because I'm worried about how the quality of them with like graphics of today would go along and like how choppy they would be. And also I would rather when I'm making content on Twitch, it would actually serve a purpose of being more educational or more eye-opening. So I'd rather do literally these kinds of presentations where I pull out my little projector and we learn about certain things. So that was originally one idea for the Tuesday stream. So there was going to be a stream on Tuesday, and I didn't do it because I kind of got cold feet of not being happy with the quality of Vampire the Masquerade 2 and how choppy it is. But the first part of that, which may become content for another video in the near future, is basically around gargoyles in Vampire the Masquerade. More specifically, we have in Vampire the Masquerade, there is Clan Gargoyle, and they weren't always a clan. So in the previous editions of the books for Vampire the Masquerade, gargoyles were simply servants and sentinels to the Tremere clan, who are a clan of like blood sorcerer vampires who stole the power of vampirism because their leaders used to be mages before, and thought it would be a great idea of, hey, vampire magic. It doesn't go against the thing that stops us from openly doing magic, because vampires can openly do magic. They can openly do their blood sorcery, but when we mages do magic, we get the paradox police on us. So how about we become vampires so we can get the vampire magic, and then we don't have to worry about the paradox cops going away and blipping us out of existence for casting magic. What they didn't realize is vampire magic stopped becoming a vampire, cuts them off from magic. So now they purely have blood sorcery. But they managed to use that to their advantage because they managed to create gargoyles. So the stone gargoyles, they managed to basically make them by grabbing two other vampires from different clans and putting them in a blender. Mixing them together, coating them in a little sheep-skinned egg, and then birthing a lovely new gargoyle sentinel to serve them. So we have gargoyles, and eventually they would become a clan because the gargoyles with their original creator would rebel and basically break free of the Tremere hold and become free, while still being hunted by the Tremere, who were in a more profitable position, even if they were weakened, of being more favored by the Camarilla. They could like still see themselves as useful to vampire society, but the gargoyles could not. So the gargoyles were being consistently hunted and found very little safety in havens, especially even like Anarch territory. So the only real place that gargoyles had safe havens from were in like the United Kingdom under the Tremere Prince Mithras. Yes, they're very much like the stone gargoyles that you're thinking of. Yes, that's the gargoyles. They aren't really made of stone, but they can make their skin harden. So they're very much capable of behaving like the gargoyles that we have, of like standing on sides of buildings, even during the day, although they couldn't move about as much, without like burning in the sun. So that's Clan Gargoyle. Eventually, they would become more of a distinct clan, not so much a mechanic, more of in narrative, because after doing some research, and the reason why I stopped this one is I want to do more research. So I want to find some of the older editions that cover gargoyles and actually read what's in there, because a lot of what I've read at the moment is basically books saying, we don't have a way of making you play as a gargoyle, and we don't advise it. We are best advising you as a storyteller to use gargoyles as narrative devices or NPCs or enemies. But I have a player who wants to play as a gargoyle, and I'm using a newer edition of Vampire the Masquerade. I'm using 5e. So I'm not using the 20th anniversary editions. I'm not using 1st or 2nd. I started learning 5th. which is the latest one, which has a lot of the fat trimmed and is more set for like interpersonal stories and like younger generational vampires and like younger vampires and newer vampires, rather than the older editions which are meant for like your old ancient vampires or your elders. Which, similarly enough, is what you get to play of in Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2. Which is kind of weird that they would do that, but it's not like inter-promotional stuff. It's most likely just the Chinese room was dealing with the hand they were dealt. But yeah, back on Clan Gargoyle, I want to like figure out a way of like narratively what interest and what spice can you add to Clan Gargoyle, rather than just saying former slaves stood up for me and now free. Now player plays as them. I kind of like wanted to look at like how does a gargoyle make a newer gargoyle? How do they embrace someone? Because the idea of what you see lots on paper is it's very similar to what like Clan Nosferatu vampires, who are the very like hideous, grotesque vampires, when they embrace someone who they see as like really beautiful, and they eventually go through the change that turns them into Nosferatu vampires. Gargoyles go through a similar thing. They bite a normal human being, and then that human being slowly transforms into a gargoyle, which I find to be very, very weird in a sense of like that change can just happen. And I was basically doing like some research and like some notes and thinking like, hey, what other approaches could we do to have a gargoyle? Yeah, so I had the idea because they still like because when a gargoyle bites a human, that human will still lose all of their memories when they become a gargoyle, and it's very much like a hive mind situation. So I was thinking of different methods of the change of turning a human. So we have our little human here. We're going, how do we turn this into like wings, if they have wings, because not all gargoyles need wings. Like how do we get from this to this? Because like if we just say human will eventually go from this to like cracky little stone skin, wings start growing out of them, they get horns. A very painful change similar to the Nosferatu. I was thinking, what if we just had rather than the gargoyle wanting to turn a human into a gargoyle, what if the gargoyle just wanted to make another gargoyle? And rather than like the gargoyle knows and like is like a victim of its own like history and past. We have this gargoyle here that's all legs. We'll call like the elder gargoyle. There we go. We'll give him little hind legs. So this gargoyle wants to make a child, or wants to like become a parent by some deep-seated desire. It might go and follow the idea of, hey, how was I made as a gargoyle? I was made a gargoyle by two vampires. No. Regardless of a gargoyle can't be freed of the curse. A gargoyle is essentially a vampire, and will forever be a vampire until they're destroyed. But a gargoyle is made by taking two vampires and blending them together. So like you put them in a blender, a little like juice of blender, until like you get all like the little vampire liquid, and then you get your gargoyle. I had the idea of, what if a gargoyle just gets in their idea of, hey, what if I take a human being that I find on the street and just put them in a blender, and then Like, so we put the human in the blender, or more specifically, the gargoyle drinks all of the blood of the human and has all the human blood just filling in its tummy. So we have human blood filled gargoyle. Gargoyle eats human, consumes them completely. Like, I would say even going so far as like eating them whole. Then we have gargoyle used like getting that out of their system and like mixing that gargoyle with like a block of clay. And then just like slowly like carving or sculpting a gargoyle. It's like we have like our little gargoyle here. He's going to just, rather than like do that. Yeah, humans on the street, they are indeed free real estate. Only the masquerade will stop you. So I think is basically the idea would be this would be very frowned upon. No like right respecting prince would allow a gargoyle to procreate. So they'd probably do it in secret. I have the idea of you take the humans, you mold them in clay, or you mix, like you literally get all of the human blood, mix it with clay, and like create this like gargoyle egg. It's like we have here our little gargoyle egg, because also gargoyles are also born from similar eggs. Although these are eggs in the ritual made to make gargoyles, are made from like sheep skin and animal skin, and then they are eventually also birthed into gargoyles. Yes, we have our not so delicious clay egg with a baby human gargoyle inside. Now, eventually, after some time sitting over this brooding egg, we will have another gargoyle. So, gargoyle 1. There we go. So then gargoyle 1 becomes gargoyle 2. Not so much looking the exact same as the gargoyle, but looking similar. Having no memories of like the human that they were, and then a vampire. So it would be very much like just a baby creature that's also just a vampire who needs to drink lots of blood and has this like dark, tempting beast inside of them that they need to quell in order to not completely lose their shit and go into a frenzy and just kill everyone. So yeah, I think that kind of situation would be very more fitting. I also like the idea of, hey, what if a bunch of gargoyles just decided, hey, what if we just didn't want to be vampires anymore, and instead we just accepted that we are gargoyles, we are not vampires, and like procreate a ton of gargoyle eggs into like a gargoyle hive. So you have like find a place or find like a crypt or catacombs, and someone goes in there and just finds a bunch of like gargoyle eggs. Technically, they do. So gargoyles do have souls. Gargoyles technically have 2 souls, because when a gargoyle is made, they are made from 2 vampires. So essentially, they have 2 beasts inside of them, because of the beasts of the vampires and whatever the vampires have. But also they lose the memories of the vampires that were used to create the gargoyle, which is a very weird thing. So you could run in a narrative of those memories slipping back in and out, and kind of plaguing the gargoyle, or the gargoyle player. But also, like, gargoyle turns a human, that human also loses their memories. So it's kind of like just rewriting someone, rather than not in the traditional sense of if a normal vampire, I say normal in the sense of like normalcy for World of Darkness, turns a human, that human still retains their memories. They just get their beast, they get their darker half of their like vampire half that tells them to be like evil and drink blood and all of that stuff. Gargoyles don't really have that because they don't have the human anchor to that. They don't have humanity. So one of the things that I think does get the idea of a gargoyle can't really be a player is the lack of that humanity, because that's the big part of playing, like especially in 5th edition. I think it could work. Or whether or not, like, you play with my stupid idea of gargoyle eggs. or Gargoyle Hive, because that seems for me, which I may actually use for like a werewolf game. So I might play Werewolf the Apocalypse, which is the World of Darkness werewolf game, and like have like a hive of gargoyle eggs as like a plot device for the werewolves. Because I think being under werewolves underground in a gargoyle hive, either trying to destroy the eggs or prevent them from hatching, would be interesting. Also similar for like a hunter game. So if we play Hunter the Reckoning, yeah, I think a bunch like it could also be a plot device for vampires. It could be a plot device for vampires of like a bunch of like a gargoyle. I mean both, to be honest. So World of Darkness is a very expansive game. So the World of Darkness, it's a series of TTRPG books where you have Vampire the Masquerade, which is the vampire one. You have Werewolf the Apocalypse, which is the werewolf TTRPG set in the same world. There's Hunter the Reckoning, where you play as just normal human beings who are hunting these monsters. In older editions, because there's no 5th edition for these ones, you can be Wraith, which is basically you are a ghost, you are a spirit in the underworld, which is its own can of worms. And then also you can be Mage, which is another can of worms, but also very separate from like werewolf and vampire. And then also you have Changeling, and it's a huge can of worms. I didn't expect the start of my stream to be like trying to explain all of this. I just have funny haha throw Gargoyle Hive at players one day idea, and thinking of stuff with that. Because I like these little thought exercises of how can you make something that isn't necessarily there altogether work in a TTRPG setting for your players, or how can you satisfy your players' desires to play a unconventional character. So at the moment, my player who's playing a gargoyle is playing a gargoyle who was created by the Tremere, so he's not like originally human. They are the amalgamation of two vampires, and it's more of the hey, we used to be slaves to these Tremere vampires and now we're free. What are we going to be doing with our lives right now? And like, how are we going to like actually keep on living? And that's basically what that player's kind of I'm trying to want to explore with them, as well as also their path of vengeance of these Tremere just made us and then enslaved us for centuries. We kind of want payback. So we have that as well. So that's what they're exploring as players. But I like the ideas of like, so one of the ideas for that is like, because there are some like homebrew supplements for Gargoyles to be played in 5e, but I feel that they could do with some additions, because those ones have the similar of like, hey, Gargoyles, because they used to be like bloodbound to Tremere, are very easy to like mentally manipulate. And I find that as being kind of sketchy, because I would think as a gargoyle who used to be like manipulated or enslaved would fucking hate that happening to them, or being like emotionally or manipulated in any way, for them to have a penalty against it. Especially if you can take an ability that basically fortifies your mind against mental attacks. So I had rather the idea of, hey, you're a gargoyle. You used to be a human who was turned into a vampire, and then you were turned into a gargoyle. You have no humanity left because you never got any memories, because the Tremere made you that way. You can explore how you want to learn how to be human, which brings me to the idea of, hey, gargoyles kind of just sit on the side of buildings like during the daytime. Why don't we just have like basically a thing of like gargoyles like sit on the sides of buildings so they can observe humanity and observe humans, and that's how a gargoyle can learn to be a person. So they are learning to be a person by watching people like from top-down view on like day-to-day life, and going like listening to the humans and kind of like replicating it. It's very Frankenstein, a very Frankenstein monster of learning to be human by examining. So I think that could be like a gargoyle's compulsion of they need to actually like spend time observing humans and like a fascination for it. So like if a compulsion is going to be like set in, they would be like, hey, your beast really wants you just to observe humans, either just as like prey or like as like a fascination or a hobby. I find that being a better bane than like one, they're already hideous monsters, so they're not going to really be around in any social situation. Two, they have the cative problem of they're not even exempted in vampire society to an extent. So essentially, a gargoyle has 3 banes already that are like similar to other clan banes. To give them the one of basically any vampire who uses dominate, which is a lot of vampires, can just mind break them. Doesn't seem like a great idea. So I would rather give them a separate fascination or a separate compulsion. You feel compelled to wear human disguises. No, you feel compelled to get human clothes. And basically, it's like the Fantastic Four movies where you just have Ben in like huge, different bulky clothes, and no one really knows he's Ben or he's made of stone. So you could play with that, but also gargoyles have the ability of 1, they can fly, and 2, they can actually meld into stone. So it's not that bad. One idea I also had for gargoyles is similar to things. So werewolves in World of Darkness have this thing called delirium. So if a werewolf basically becomes like full werewolf in like a public situation or around humans, those humans will eventually just forget that even happened, because there's this innate human fear of werewolves that causes this delirium and panic when they see a werewolf. So that's how it mechanically is allowed to explain like how a werewolf can be in public and then eventually just be forgotten, unless like someone's taking photos. I have that idea for gargoyles, similar to kind of the like statues in the Doctor Who episode of the one with the angels, of the human mind will just like trick itself into believing that a statue was always there, even if the statue moved locations. So I have this idea of like people in public see a gargoyle just perch in a different spot, and then their mind tricks them into thinking that gargoyle was always there. Or if the gargoyle changes its pose, the human mind kind of tricks itself into thinking it was always in that pose, until like they see a photograph of it in a different pose, and it kind of like creates that deja vu, but the image is not completely set. So that's an idea I had of like explaining like how gargoyles can like move around. Yeah, they can play red light, green light, but more so if unless like a person sees that gargoyle move, that's when they'll go into a panic and like that thing's moving. I'm scared shitless. But also like you can go invisible in Vampire the Masquerade with like the obfuscate abilities. So you can just like blip and go invisible and stay invisible, and also be invisible to cameras with the right disciplines and the right abilities and talents. So you can circumvent stuff that way, unless you really just don't want to take those abilities as a gargoyle. In which case, you're just going to crash through everything. And also more for the case of like, a gargoyle isn't going to be really dealing with humans. I'd probably see like a gargoyle being more of like a distant observer, rather than like an actual like get in there and like buying hot dogs from like a like guy that they see every now and then, or building connections. So it also kind of goes into like how a gargoyle would hunt for their regular source of blood, which I kind of think of like they kind of like swoop down, grab someone, fly up in the air, nom nom nom, drop them back down safely, or just drop them. And they play with that idea. So yeah, it's a lot. I have a lot of interesting ideas. I kind of want to go into a full-length video for like YouTube. So I might like work on something and edit it, And also, I kind of didn't expect myself to be talking about the Gargoyle situation or the Gargoyle idea for like half an hour now. So yeah, the Gargoyle that was not a scheduled thing. That was more of like a rambling. So we will get back to our regularly scheduled topic today. So